Welcome to Opinionated here on I24 News, the show that challenges consensus, analyzes the events that shape our world, and draws out the views of our guests for the consideration of you, the viewing audience. I'm your host, Benjamin Anthony, CEO of the Miriam Institute. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu's brief and hastened visit to Washington, D.C. is slated to last for just 32 hours. His visit, of course, comes as US-Iran negotiations continue against the backdrop of a massive military buildup by the Americans. And my first guest is an individual with a rare degree of experience when it comes to understanding America's military capabilities, he having served as the commander of British forces in Afghanistan. And with that, it's my pleasure to welcome Colonel Richard Kemp, who joins me here in the studio. Colonel Kemp, welcome.
Great pleasure to be with you, Benjamin.
Thank you for being with me. So let's dive right into this. There's a lot of talk about the disparity between the Iranian negotiating position, which is that they are willing to talk about essentially enrichment, and what Israel would like the American negotiating position to be, which would be to cover the end of the nuclear program, a severe curbing of the ballistic missile program, and also an end, really, to the proxy program that we've all had to fight and contend with here in Israel since October the 7th, and in fact, long before. How do you think that we're going to bridge that gap, and how does the military build-up lead into bridging that gap, if at all?
Well, I think, first of all, the military build-up is an essential component of actually getting anything out of the Iranians. You know, large-scale active military presence in the region, clearly directed at Iran, has got to focus their minds and got to get them thinking at least about agreeing to some form of concessions. And I think President Trump will want to secure significant concessions. He's not going to have this massive military force here and walk away with a couple of minor prizes. He's going to want something very significant, but probably including not only enrichment issues, but also including the issues that Israel's very keen on, which, as you say, is the whole business of nuclear disarmament, of ballistic missiles, etc., and ending their support for proxies in the region. I'm pretty sure Trump will be thinking along the same lines. I don't think there's much space between Israel and the US on this. But I do think that if Iran is wise enough to offer something big to Trump, then he may well take that and stand down. He may well do so.
What sort of thing could the Iranians offer President Trump in order for him to stay his hand? Without, by the way, being accused of being like Barack Obama. You remember Barack Obama said that he had a red line. It was promptly crossed. There were no consequences for the Syrian regime when they started moving those chemical weapons around. So what could Iran offer?
Well, I think it's got to be ending the nuclear project, stopping or at least severely restricting ballistic missiles, and ending support to proxies in the region. That's if they're not willing to do at least two or three or all three of those things, I don't think he's going to walk away. And I don't think they're likely to offer that. And if they do offer it, whatever they offer, I'm sure Prime Minister Netanyahu now is reminding Trump of this, if he needs reminding. Whatever Iran offers, you can't take their word for it. You absolutely can't take whatever they say as being something they will do, because they will not do it.
So let me ask you something. I'd like you, with your expertise, to paint a picture for us. Israel was rightly very focused on stopping Iran's nuclear weapons program for reasons everybody ought to understand. I think less understood is just the massive damage that Iran's wanted arsenal of ballistic missiles threatens to bring to Israel and, frankly, to the neighborhood. Could you just explain why Israel is now so adamant against the ballistic missile program, which really came to the top latterly?
Yeah, well, I was here myself, as I'm sure you were, during the 12-day war, and we both saw the damage that Iran's ballistic missiles did. I think something like 29 got through, something like that, which is a relatively small proportion, because most of them were knocked out of the sky before they left the Iranian airspace even. But you know, there was quite a few deaths as a result of that, and there could have been more, could easily have been more. And of course, Israel's not prepared to tolerate that sort of thing. It's very clear that they must preferably end a regime that threatens Israel like that, that wishes to see the destruction of Israel. And if they can't end that regime, at the very least, they must end their ballistic missile program alongside nuclear missile program.
Let me ask you about something else. I've always thought the ebullience and celebration around normalization is a little bit overstated for various reasons. And we're actually seeing whether normalization is happening or is about to happen. We're seeing trouble in the region. We're seeing trouble because Qatar, Turkey, that was formerly in joint military exercises with Israel regularly and often, the Saudis, where there was mooted to be normalization right on its way, they are lobbying. We're not surprised about the Qataris, but Turkey, the Saudis, and also the Egyptians, with whom we have a peace treaty, are lobbying Donald Trump not to take action against the regime. How can these people really be trusted, and what's informing those decisions?
Well, I think you have to look at Turkey and Qatar separately to an extent.
Agreed.
Because they are strong supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Mm-hmm.
They're strong supporters of Hamas, and they want harm done to Israel. And
the reason I threw Turkey in there, just to be clear, is because they're emblematic of what worries me, which is we used to have a pretty strong alliance with them, and now they're an overt enemy. But exactly as you described.
And I think an alliance could return under different leadership with Turkey. But we'll put that aside for a moment. But I think the other countries, Saudi Arabia and Egypt in particular, they say Arab countries do say one thing but mean another, and they'll say something publicly and something else under the table. I would be very surprised, in particular, if Saudi Arabia and also Egypt don't want to see the downfall of this regime in Tehran. I'm pretty sure they do. But they're saying this for public consumption rather than actually, and I'm sure that they're passing different messages about this to Trump and the White House.
Back in the old country, Britain, where I grew up, in the defense of which you proudly served, heroically served, it seems to have completely lost its will to stand up for its culture, and it seems to be bending the knee to what many people say is immigration, but I actually think is Islamification of not just Britain, but Europe. But Britain's an example of that. What do you see its destiny now in the next 10, 20 years? Do service personnel such as yourself, who deployed so bravely overseas in the pursuit of protecting British interests, do they like what they see when they come back home?
I can't speak for servicemen generally, but what I can say is that British soldiers who fought in Afghanistan, they fought against the Taliban and other Islamic extremists. And there were more British people, British Muslims, serving with the Taliban, fighting on the side of the Taliban against the British than there were Muslims in the British Army during that period. That, I think, is an indication of the state of play. Things are going to get worse. Things have been getting worse, getting bad for many, many years, and they're only going to get worse. And no government, either the government now or no prospective government of the UK, has the guts to stop it. If they want to take strong action to prevent the Islamification of the UK, then it's going to mean big trouble for them. They don't want trouble. They look 4 years ahead. They will kick the can down the road to somebody else. And I think the end result of that is very likely to be civil war in Britain, where the indigenous...
Physical civil war?
Actual civil... I'm not talking about the American Civil War uniformed armies. I'm talking about something more like Northern Ireland, but on a much more intensive scale, where you have the indigenous British and the some of the immigrant population and the British government all on three different sides fighting against each other. And if I'd be very surprised if that doesn't happen, because there's no prospect of the government, any government today, stopping this from occurring. And the big problem that British people have is they don't have political choice. We don't really live in a democracy. Whatever party you vote for, you get the same policies. And that applies also to the immigration and to the way in which the Islamic population is allowed to grow, and not just grow in numbers, but grow in dominance. They're increasingly bold. There are now in Parliament, since the last election, there are something like 6 Islamist MPs, members of Parliament, who got elected on a Gaza platform in a British election.
Yeah,
and we're going to see much more of that in the next election.
Let me ask you just one last question that rides off your answer there. Keir Starmer managed, very embattled. I'm pleased that he's embattled, to declare my hand. But Keir Starmer seems to be the embodiment of a politician and a non-leader. Does the fact that he managed to find his way to recognizing a phantom, non-existent, apparition Palestinian state. Does that sum up everything that you're basically describing?
It tells you everything, because that decision to recognize the state of Palestine, which doesn't exist, as you rightly say, was nothing to do with foreign policy. It's nothing to do with the state of Palestine. It's all to do with appeasing his Labour Party supporters, which are a combination of Islamic people who support their Islamic religion themselves, or hard left.
Mm-hmm.
And the combination of what's called the Red-Green Alliance in Britain led to that. That's what it's all about. It's all about appeasement. Nothing to do with what's going on over here at all. Nothing.
Well, Colonel Richard Kemp, it's a privilege to have you. Thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. My next guest is an acclaimed academic at Reichman University here in Herzliya, where she's the academic director of the International Program in Government. But separate from her academic accomplishments, Professor Daphne Richmond-Barak is now sounding the alarm about what she terms a silent academic boycott of not only Israeli academics, which would be horrific enough, but also of Jewish academics, to discuss her personal experience with that dangerously insidious phenomenon. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Daphne Richmond-Barak here in the studio. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you for having me on your new show.
So I want to start right at the issue. You have said that there is a silent academic boycott that is taking place against Israeli academics, Jewish academics, and it's essentially founded on 4 pillars: intimidation, exclusion, cancellation, and isolation. You were the victim of one such boycott just now at a NATO conference at which you were scheduled to speak in your field house, namely urban warfare. For the benefit of the NATO participants, what actually happened?
Yes, so the effect of this silent academic boycott that we're talking about is essentially to exclude Jewish students, Israeli students, and also Jewish and Israeli academics from a healthy academic life, right? And so what happened to me in recent days is that I had been invited to participate, to speak at a NATO event on special environments, including urban warfare. And I was going to speak specifically about subterranean warfare. This had been in the works for a year, endless emails back and forth, as it usually is, scheduling the event. And then eventually the schedule was sent to all the participants, including my name and my affiliation. And everything was done. And then I get an email telling me that, unfortunately, I won't be able to participate in this meeting because my participation, basically, there is one member of NATO that is objecting to my participation. I am persona non grata, and therefore I won't be able to come. So that is an example of how an academic, I'm not even an official right of the IDF or of the Israeli government, is being precluded to enter NATO circles for now and for the future.
So you've spoken about how they're slow walking, essentially, the destruction of a flourishing academic career.
Mm-hmm.
The academics need time to think. That's what they're paid to do. They need time to gather their thoughts, do their research, and then publish their papers. There's a famous axiom in academia that either publish or perish. So by tying academics up in any number of excuses as to why they can't come to a conference, whether it be suddenly there are no expenses that they're able to pay, or it might be a patronizing idea such as that it's too dangerous for you to attend the conference, they're doing it for your own good.
Right.
By tying that up, they're actually bringing about the complete perishing of an academic's career, are they not?
Totally. Academia is built on visibility, first of all. So when you get a cancellation like this, you don't just get a cancellation or a trip that's not going to happen, but what is going to be the fallout of this is fewer citations, fewer exposures, future collaborations are not going to materialize. That publication with those colleagues is not going to be in the works. And so when you lose that visibility, it's essentially when you start shrinking, right? And when you shrink now, you feel the effects much later. And when this is happening on a grand scale, and it accumulates, I think part of the issue with the silent boycott is that it is not formal. It's part of the idea, right? It's informal. Also, the conditions are made so unpleasant that eventually people withdraw, right? They don't apply to those grants. They don't apply to those conferences because of the fear of being rejected. Students don't show up at lectures, right? Because they know they won't be able to speak their opinions. And so that is like really what shrinks academia, where you're not able to be on that global stage anymore, where you are isolated.
So talking about the shrinking of academia, Prime Minister Netanyahu made a statement about the importance, he later recanted, but he made a statement about his desire to see Israel become a Sparta a Sparta nation, almost an isolated nation, very, very strong. That doesn't work in the realm of academia because of the collaborations that you're talking about. Now, I want to ask you, I think people could understand if Israeli academics, I wouldn't agree with it, but if Israeli academics were being boycotted. But you're saying it's enough to just be Jewish in the eyes of the adjudicator, and you will be boycotted, your academic career will be clamped. Is that right?
Absolutely right. There was a very interesting conference that took place at Rachman University a few months ago about anti-Semitism in universities in France. And you had several academics who came on this delegation, very courageous academics, I should note. And they all reported, none of them was Israeli. All of them told stories about how they have guards in front of their classrooms. They don't even teach anything related to Israel. There's nothing specific about what they are doing or who they are other than the fact that they are Jewish. And this puts them in basically at risk. And their students are also kind of facing this really unpleasant environment in which, who wants to get into a lecture when you have a guard at the door? And they all reported endless amounts of incidents to which they are. This is why they came to Israel, to actually share their story. So absolutely, this is happening to Jewish academics also in the United States. I was at the International Studies Association conference in Chicago last year, and you had lots of Jewish academics who barely even remembered they were Jewish before October 7th. And then suddenly they have posters all around campus with their name, their photos on it, saying wanted, and they are not able to actually engage in a healthy, productive, visible academic career anymore.
So let's move on to something else. I mean, you were essentially disinvited from that NATO conference to speak about your expertise. You regularly speak about tunnel warfare, for example, urban warfare. You are a recognized expert on it. With the inability to go and speak that you've faced and that you're saying others face, I want to know something. Is the Israeli government helping?
Look, the Israeli government is not helping. And I just want to say that I don't think that the way that academia or Israel is perceived on the international stage is one of the top priorities of this government. So I don't think this is even on their radar. And I think when we face it, first of all, we have to speak to each other, academics. We have to share our stories. That's also part of the reason why I'm here today. And we have to do that without shame. And we have to be very strong and proud of who we are at the same time. And we have to also handle it by ourselves, absolutely on our own.
Is this worse, would you say, in Europe or in the United States? America woke up to something that I'd been warning about for many years, which is this tsunami, as I've said, of anti-Semitism on campuses that was washing towards them. They're now alert to it. I don't think that they have any really clear ideas about what to do about it. Where would you say that this academic boycott is taking roots and branch more swiftly, Europe or America?
I think we're in the same situation. I head the international program in government at Reichman, as you said, and I get people coming to my office. I've seen generations of students, right? 17 years of students who study, students who graduate, students who go on the job market, students who want to do PhDs, and they're reporting similar stories, whether it's about European institutions or whether it is about American institutions. It's a very similar story, and it's a story that is unfolding. And they are now they're making choices about education based on where they feel safe, or where, even worse, they feel the least unsafe. So when you have students, a new generation, right, making these kind of choices, balancing between education and identity, asking if they're going to be able to voice their opinion or are they going to be silenced, I think these are this is the real deal. When I spoke to the French academics, I think a question that kept popping up, or was on everybody's mind, was, so is the university a microcosm of what's to come for French society, or is it actually going to remain contained in academia? Okay. And I think the answer is very clear to that. Both in the United States and in Europe, it's not going to stay in universities. This is a warning of what's to come on the larger scale.
Of course. So my last question, quick answer. Have we got Jewish and Israeli agitators making this worse, including professors perhaps here in universities in Israel?
Not that I know of in Israel. I know that in Europe, there are definitely people who are, voicing very harsh criticism. And then it's not just criticism. Here, we're talking about actually taking steps in favor of those boycotts. It's a real concern. I want to say that one of the things that I hear about the most right now is how the Jewish community is itself turning its back on Israeli students who are studying abroad. and when the Jewish communities are no longer supportive of their Israeli brothers and sisters who come to study for a year or two in London, for example, we are in real trouble. So this is really a very wide, with very wide reach, and we have to tackle these things. There are ways that we can do that. People are looking where to invest these days, right? Because they don't want to give their money to Columbia University. What they can do is giving money to Columbia University professors, for example, who are sympathetic, to invite Israeli scholars to basically do counter BDS, right? To do that in other universities as well. There's a great program at MIT led by faculty to make sure that these ties between Israel and the MIT are actually continuing. So they have donors giving money to that. That is worth investing in.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. Difficult subject, but thanks for shining light on it.
Thank you very much.
Now, on another note, the call to get Jews into the pews is a woefully incomplete maxim when assessing how best to urgently safeguard the American Jewish future. Because if Jews don't feel safe in those pews, they'll simply cease to attend. Engulfed as they are by a tsunami of Jew hatred, Jews must now take to the boxing gyms and to the dojos, to the CPR classes, and yes, to the firing ranges. They must rapidly morph into trained, capable, and formidable protectors of their cherished way of life, not as militants, but as defenders. American Jewish leaders ought to be imploring their congregants to occasionally leave the pews in order to personally protect their institutions. What I'm about to share is a response to, not a generator of, horrific plans that are already being hatched by those who hate Jews to murder Jews using firearms that are in ready supply. And if you doubt that, I invite you to check the online chat rooms. After the October 7th failure, in Israel, we turned inward for protection. The Israeli creed of continuity has always declared that we defend ourselves by ourselves. But American Jewry still cannot determine how best to stay safe. So here's just one suggestion. Still now today, when I approach synagogue entrances in the US, I'm greeted by a guard, a hired gun, if you will. Now, to test the seriousness of these sentries, I politely ask them to direct me to the main services. Starkly put, I am still repeatedly led to a mass collective of would-be victims by the very individuals who are paid and relied upon to provide protection. Now, this practice of not just synagogues, but American Jewish establishments writ large, of outsourcing their security to a third party must be ended. Well-meaning community leaders are naively and mistakenly entrusting your safety to people who know not, care not, or believe not in the nature of the threats that are massing against you. Roughly equivalent to this would be for Israelis to ask the United Nations to dispatch peacekeeping forces to come to our aid on October 8th, and then actually foolishly expect them to do so. Now, the truth is that turning a hired gun from largely useless to highly useful requires a little bit of effort. Simply put, they must be constantly accompanied by community volunteers who are trained to swiftly and sensibly determine who shall pass and who shall not. I believe this to be more than doable. Consider that in Israel, our combat soldiers comprise just 11% of our total force. Jewish community leaders need to start right there. You need to find your 11%. And then you need to deploy them to this mission. Doing so will cost you nothing, but it may very well prevent the next impending disaster. And if done, American Jewry might finally begin to fear somewhat less, reassured by the fact that just like us here in Israel, American Jews have resolved once and for all that they will defend themselves by themselves. And that concludes this episode of the show. Join me next week for more Opinionated.